Welcome, everyone. My name is Tony Cockmo, president of CivilCAD Learn Solution, also president of the DFW BIM Infrastructure User Group. And welcome to another session of Tech Talk Tuesday. Today, we have a guest. Christian is going to go over blocks, but in a fun, unique way. So, Christian, if you want to introduce yourself and take over, and let's see what you have today.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Tony. Hi, everyone. My name is Christian Fierro, and I am a huge Civil 3D enthusiast. I love Civil 3D and all of the fun mysteries that it beholds, and we can always explore through some unorthodox objects and learn along the way of, how to push the boundaries of what AutoCAD can actually do for us. So I'll present my screen right now.
Okay, it's on.
Multi-piece blocks. And some topics we're going to cover over is we're going to look at object layers and we're going to understand the use for these for the desired labels, for editing text and understanding blocks, color and layer control. So understanding the by layer and the by block function and kind of when you can decide when to use it for your AutoCAD standards. We'll also look at defining our origin point and why that is very crucial, especially whenever we're looking at creating dynamic blocks. Next, we're going to look at intentional blocks, creating with a purpose. Everything we want to do is intentional, and whenever we go about creating a block for a specific feature, or we're looking at adding on different parameters or functions for said block, we want everything to be for a reason. Next, we're going to look at what it looks like for conceptualizing, creating blocks, as well as going through the process of what that could like. And then we'll kind of talk through ourselves on getting from a concept to preliminary to our final, and then actually executing it for pushing this out. So without further ado, I bring to you the end result for this topic here. So we're going to look at building this dynamic block tank function. So whenever I click on this object, we can see that we have different parameters. And if I go to my block editor, I can see that I have a little bit of simplified parameters shown inside of here. So we have some brief animations, kind of just showing like an explosion from the cannon. We also have missiles inside of here. We have our cannon. We also have our base as well. So we're going to look at how we can build this in a sustaining manner to where we don't have to go back and start redoing the block over and over and over again. As you know, when it comes with dynamic properties, all of these sets here, so if I go to action selection set and modify set, I'm modifying or I'm selecting this specific block or object. So if I have any loose line work in here, let's say polyline, this would be an object. If I have a circle, this would be a set object as well. So whenever we want to modify any of this and we either remove, copy, it will start messing up a lot of these parameters, and then we have to consistently relink the objects to the parameter. So a fun way of building this is we're going to start out with conceptualizing what we want to create first. This is what we're going to essentially start out with. This is our main concept here. We have a simple box, we have a circle, we also have this turret in place here, and then we'll look at creating these different blocks. We also have this conceptual roadway here, so the tank could follow a given path as well. Now, we're going to go through really quickly of some cool animations for using some of these blocks. Now, just setting the scene here, we have a side view of a tank coming in on a parachute, and then we have a profile view here, And then we also have a sad sun that doesn't have any features to it. Now notice this sad sun is a station elevation label. So we're going to look at combining in blocks, good practices in with creating label styles as well. And if we have to modify said label styles that are using blocks. And then down here, we have a plan view for here. So looking through here, if I select my object here, and I created this little controller, and we can kind of look at it go down. So it's coming down here. And now once it has landed, we now have a tank block that is a projected view of this block here. Now notice this projected object view is only a marker style. So we're using a marker style for our object, for our projected object view. So we can mix in creating blocks with marker styles. We can use them for label styles, all these different types of styles for our AutoCAD drawing. So now looking at here, we can now, let's say, click on our plan view tank, and then we can kind of have a somewhat of an animation of them moving seamlessly together. And they're tracking along a given path, one given vertically and then one given horizontally. Now, we can now set in the scene of, let's say we have this truck here. We can select our tank reference here. And let's say if we wanted to track this along a alignment, I included an alignment parameter on this block. So given the rotation, it will always stay true to here. It will always track along this path. Now, looking onto here, if I have two different independent controls. I have one that's manually controlling my turret. I also have another one that independently controls the base of my tank. And now a second function is I can, let's say, point this to here, and I can have a separate animation of pulling out a missile with a guided with a rocket, kind of traveling along the path of my cannon, essentially on its x-axis. So once it goes into here, we could then now simulate it going into this truck, and then we could then give another animation of it exploding here. Now all these is driven by blocks still. Now let's say we can take it back over here, change our visibility state. And now we have another one set for, let's say, 50 caliber rounds. So this is a turret that essentially pulls out and then can essentially go in the direction of the turret here. So that's kind of some cool ways that we can look at building blocks and maintaining it. Now, the difficult about building something like this here is in the event that things need to change, there's always going to be change. How can we better suit ourselves to make these changes in a sustaining manner? If it gets too complicated to change something, then, I mean, you're probably just going to either not use it or you're going to do bad practices just to make it a bit easier, right? i.e., for example, exploding the block and then manually moving it where you see fit. So looking at through here, if we have a label style with that we're using a block here, this label style is using the reference of this block here. So we can easily have this practice to, let's say, make some very simple modifications along here. And then this will then update all of the corresponding label styles with this block. So if we have to have any refinements at all, we can always do that. But also in the event that let's say if you're wanting to create a label style, you're wanting to create a certain type of block or whatever it is, or you want to start setting your blocks in a tool palette or referencing them through a CUI and so on, but you don't have the block fully done, you can still create the links as placeholders, right? And then from there, we could always refine it over time. So we're going to look at some methods of, you know, starting from here and then seeing how we can use these best practices to essentially build this tank block here. So the first thing of how I built this was I have different types of blocks. I have a base one. Now this one is for my color variations of my for my block itself. This one is just has the line work of the base. This one is just the turret, the cannon line work. Now this one here is just the color itself. Now, why did I mesh all of these separately? Why didn't I just put them all into one? Well, if I look under my block editor here, everyone sees this, the amount of lines and hatches and circles, and there's just too much going on in here, right? So if I wanted to make any adjustments to just my color of my object, I'm going to be block here. So looking at here, what I can do is combine both of these into one block. So I can have a plan dash base. And this one is very important here because I can set all of these completely individually. So whenever I modify my one block, I can also modify my other block as well. And all of these can be directed in the same insertion point of my 0, 0. And all of them can mesh together. And if there's ever a display order issue, like let's say such as here, I can always send it to back and isolate my working area. So one way to think about this is if we're looking at our XREFs. So if I have an XREF and it has, and if I have my utility base and my site base and these different XREFs, instead of putting everything into one, that can cause me some headaches. So then we like to separate them out into different working areas and overlay them on top of each other for a final product. That's very similar to how we're doing with this here. Next, looking at some other accessories to this here is, let's say, a animation, and let's say we have this missile along with here. Now, the insertion point of these is very important as well, because once we start modifying anything for here, inside of our dynamic block, we're connecting these together via the insertion point. So whenever we make adjustments, such as if we look at mtext and we look at a simple justification. If we look at through here, we have a left justification. So if we make any changes to this, either shorten it or modify it or whatever, it still holds this justification. So same exact way of thinking for our blocks as well. So now let's look at putting together our concept. So first, I would like to have a tank object. So here's some ways that we can create a conceptual block. Think of it kind of like a temporary block. We can select our objects and then we can type in group. And then what this does is it kind of just ties in all of our line work together as if they were one. We don't have to create a specific, block for them if we're kind of just testing something out here. Now, the next part is after we put them all together, then we can look at, well, what would it look like if we would separate these out into two independent objects? So we can type in group, into two groups here. We have one, and then we have two. So I can kind of go through this myself and think about, well, I would like to independently rotate this or move this or do anything while not modifying this property here. You see, both of these have their same orientation relative to the common insertion point here. So now, once we kind of have a general idea of how we would like to go about this, we can now look at ungrouping this and then start putting this together. So what I would like to do is I would like to select my polyline. I'd like to block this. And then let's say I'll call this my base. I'll say this is my example base line work. And then I'm going to pick the same insertion point amongst everything else. Okay. And now I'm going to select my cannon here. And I'll go to block. Then I'll name this, let's say, cannon line work. And then I'll pick the same origin point. So now what we have is we have two different blocks, very similar to our initial groups. So I can kind of look at here and say, okay, well, I like this. This is working fine. But one thing that I don't want to have is I don't want to have two different blocks doing two different things. Because if I look at both of these, their rotations is completely different. And whenever I want to move one object, I have to then select another object to then move it. So this is the point of having a dynamic block. So what I'm kind of figuring out for myself is what I probably want to do is incorporate a rotation parameter, maybe a move parameter, some additional parameters, and select these different blocks to do a specific function. So now I can look at this. I can, let's say, go to copy. And now I'm going to select here. I'm going to then separate out these two here. These are, let's say, my working areas. I'm going to select both of these objects here again with the same insertion point. That's very, very important to this. We can now block it. I'll call this my example. My example tank. Same insertion point as everything else. Now we go inside of here and we know that we want to create some part of independent control. But again, we're still conceptualizing this. We're still working through this. So we don't want to tie ourselves into a position to where we're having to redo our work. So what we want to do is we want to create a rotation parameter. Let's say I'll use my starting point, my 0, 0, 0 origin point, and I'll select, let's say, my mid of my base here. And then I'm going to assign an action to it, to my parameter. Now notice I'm selecting the block itself. So remember, whenever there's a change of this block, this parameter will still hold that link. If I just do line work to this here, it will then disassociate itself every time I make any changes to it. So I'll create another one. So this one here will control my base rotation. Now I'll do another parameter for rotation here. And then I'll select the edge of my turret for here. And this is my rotation parameter node. I'll apply another rotation to this action, select my turret, enter, and now I could then come here and close my block editor. And now I can independently have everything rotating how I was initially planning it. And whenever I rotate any of these here, these nodes aren't rotating separately as well. Some dynamic blocks you'll see whenever you use some rotation parameters or different move parameters, you're going to start noticing a lot of other parameters start moving. That's because whenever an object is being moved, the parameter is not referencing that object or parameter itself. So now the next thing is we would like to create a path for this so I don't have to always manually position this accordingly, right? So we can go back to our drawing board and I'll just zero everything out here. Now, what I can look at doing is I can look at creating a constraint, or actually this would be a parameter for an alignment parameter. We'll do 0, 0, 0. And then I'll just select the midpoint for here. Now, once I take this block, it automatically associates itself to this line and it rotates based on the alignment of this line. So I can follow any sort of curvature and it automatically snaps to that line. Well, now one issue is, well, what if I choose to change this rotation? Now this is no longer perpendicular. This is no longer running parallel among this line here, which looks a bit funky. So we're going to have to go back to our drawing board and notice that whenever we rotate this parameter does not change. That's because this rotation parameter is not in sequence with the alignment parameter. So we'll go back here, we'll just zero everything out. So now we can go to our rotation parameter, action selection set, modify, and now select our alignment to where whenever we rotate this, our alignment itself rotates automatically. So we can come in here, now select it, and whenever we make changes to our rotation, this changes as well. I gotta relink this here. So whenever we change this parameter here, this rotates with this now. So this is now in sync together. So now next what we want to do is we have our concept, we have our rotations set into place, so we can start adding in some concepts. We can start adding in some final ideas. Now remember, whenever we built this here, we did not use this block here whatsoever, but these are exactly the same. The functions are the same, the rotations, how they're affecting is the exact same. This is independently the exact same way as this. Now, what's the difference? The contents of the block. So notice once we go into here, we're going to quickly change this automatically and keep our blocks subject to change a bit easier. So how we're going to do that is we're going to take, let's say, these blocks here, our baseline work, and let's say one for our example cannon line work. I'm now going to select my plan base block. And then I'll just paste it into here. I can remove this. I don't need it anymore. That was, again, just a placeholder. I can now go inside of here. Now I have my Canon line work here. I can copy this, select it into here, and then I can make that change while keeping the same insertion point for everything else. So now once I look at my concept, they're completely identical. And I didn't change anything. And you see here, my dynamic functions still work the exact same because I built my placeholders for a block. Now, once I go to my block editor, again, this is the same exact block that I created before. I now have my objects inside of here properly defined to where I can start making changes to this block however much I want to, and my dynamic properties are still set accordingly. So that's how we can look at conceptualizing making a block and then transitioning it to a final product. Now, next, looking at how our blocks should be defined. So let's say, let me just add a quick hatch into here. So here's the difference between both of these here. If I look at both of these blocks, they're on different layers, but inside of my block properties, I have this circle and this hatch. Both of them are defined under a by layer, by layer, by layer, by layer, by layer. Now, this one here is only defined as a by block. So looking at through here, let's say if I wanted to make this to by block, I can, and so on. So the major difference of this, and this is honestly huge whenever it comes with building object styles. So again, we're mixing good block creation habits into producing really good label styles and object styles and how all of these correlate together. So if I build a certain type of object style, and if I use a by block function to it, I can now change the block color, and my color that I'm assigning to my block here will then change. This value will then change automatically. This is essentially like my color override. Now, once I go inside of here to my by layer one, it does not give me that same flexibility. All of these is solely driven by the layer color itself. So I would have to go into here to then make my different adjustments accordingly. So I can still change my by block, and I can change this one here, and both of them change accordingly. But the moment I want to change something individually, one feature you can look at doing this is, let's say if you're adding any additions on a given design, right? And you want to show either this would be an STP or an IFC related drawing or CAD file. And what you would like to do is show this block as red or some other obvious color to where whenever it prints, it shows red. Instead of creating a specific object style to handle this, right? Because that's again creating more object styles for this purpose, blah, 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 blah. We can simply create object styles by building them on a by block function. And then whenever we go down the line of, let's say, existing and propose and revise or whatever the case is, we have the flexibility of individually selecting these and making these red while still having the same layers, same object styles, and same block count. Now, one caveat to building these types of dynamic blocks is if we end up creating this one block here, this block has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 blocks into one block, essentially. So that could incredibly pollute your drawing. And I do mean pollute it as in it can just, it can become very dense, very, very fast. And if you're wanting to use a complicated block, you can always revert back to the drawing board and think about, okay, well, I know I'm probably not going to change this a lot, so I can just mix these two into here, and then we could then, boom, we just remove two different blocks, right? So how we're managing our CAD libraries is very important as well. Next thing to look at is how we're naming these libraries. So if I go to here to my, let's say to my insert, I'll say I'll go to my rename command. So under here, I have a lot of different blocks inside of my drawing. Now looking at here, this is how I organize some of my working blocks. I have a plan for all my plan related tank blocks, and then I have my profile for all my profile related tank blocks as well. And then I have some miscellaneous stuff into here as well. Now, these are very important is whenever we start defining our tool palettes and our CUI shortcuts, the whole purpose of them is to pull from a source drawing. And whenever that source drawing is referencing a specific block name, you don't want to keep changing that name. But what you always can do is you can always, again, create that placeholder with the proper name first, set those links, then you can always tweak it later on. Now, if anyone was wondering of where I got this line work at, I just pulled it from from an online source. The online source is drawingmodels.com, and then this is the link for it that I pulled it from. And the link just got me this raw line work here, where it just gave me a lot of lines, and then I did my own processing for it.
Extremely detailed CAD block of a tank.
Yeah,
Wow, I'm pretty impressed of whoever put the effort in to draw that tank.
yeah, exactly. It was pretty cool. Now, here's some different ideas too. So this was a first iteration that I was kind of going through this here. So I was looking at different uses of my visibility state. So if I go to here, then I can kind of look at different animations of Missile Blast 1, here's 2, here's 3, and then once it triggers into this visibility state, it then triggers a move parameter for my fire animation or for my thrust animation and my missile itself to where I can manually grab this here, and then I can then drag it accordingly to wherever it needs to go. And then once I take it from here, then I could cycle to, missile explodes and different things of that sort. So this is where it was at kind of first. But now looking at this drawing, there was just a lot going on into it. So the idea was to simplify it after a bit of different iterations, just kind of going through some tests here. And instead of heavily relying on visibility states, and again, during the entire process, I did not have to, while I was making those adjustments, I didn't have to redefine my parameter sets at all because everything was still linked, So that was a really good you know, part to this here. So that's is pretty much it um, for this presentation. I covered everything that I wanted to cover, and I kind of wanted to leave up the floor for anyone who wanted to ask any questions, or if you guys wanted to see anything specific, and we can kind of have some interactive time.
Yeah, so I want to touch on some things you talked about. Um, I guess on the very last part of it, you were talking about the move parameter. Did you just do one move parameter, or you had to do multiple move parameters?
Only one.
One? Okay. So I saw
Hmm.
you move
Yeah.
it. You were talking about move parameter, then you moved it again. I'm like, okay, is it creating a a length of move parameters? So
No,
yeah.
it's interesting because so looking at here, what I did was I created a link parameter to my move function to
Hmm.
where whenever do you see this here? Whenever I drag this part out, for example, it then would reference this. So they would essentially be tied together.
Oh,
So
okay.
once it crosses a certain threshold, then I flip off one visibility state. That visibility state, let's say, freezes this one, and
Yeah.
then it picks this one up the whole time. That's
Hmm.
why whenever we take this move missile visibility state, so let's say if we go back to here to our missile moves, this moves wherever we want it to go,
Yeah.
right? And then cycling another visibility state, it then kind of has that exploding animation. So it's all independently tracked, but
Yeah.
we can also link different parameters together with
Yeah.
these.
I'm sure this will come up um on the recording. Somebody's going to ask like, well, where did you get the controller application? You know?
Oh, this is mine. I built this.
Yeah, so that somebody's gonna come up and it's like, well, where's that at? So if I guess if they want to learn more about that, they can reach out to you uh, about how to build one or where'd you build it or where'd you get it, so
Yeah, yeah.
so,
I built this.
mhm.
I'm making some games for AutoCAD,
Yeah.
for example. So I went online and I got a picture of a directional pad,
Mm,
and then I made different. This is just a regular CUI panel. This is
yeah,
the same thing as all of this here.
yeah.
So yeah, I have a large and I have a small. So that's it for
uh,
now.
I did notice at the very beginning you were creating groups. Did you turn those groups into blocks?
No.
Okay. That was just kind of like I was a little confused. Like, wait a minute, I saw you do groups and then you talked about blocks, and I'm like, wait a minute, are they groups and then turned into blocks? So I was a little
Yeah,
confused.
yeah, I ungroup them and
Okay.
then I turn them into blocks.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's kind of a new way to look at things in a different way, but having a fun with it. Uh, for those that didn't know, can we talk about the other game you did? I don't know if you want to talk about it. Just mention about it that you showed me.
which one?
Was it the chess?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah, I can talk about it. I can't show it at the moment
yeah,
though.
yeah.
But
Um,
yeah, so I'm creating a like an AutoCAD game type of library. So
yeah,
this will have chess, this will have checkers, this will have Clue, different sorts of interactive games, and it's all built off of using XREF
yep,
base. So we can, as long as we're on the same server, we
yep.
can play this
You
interactively
can
together.
you can play tank. You got those tanks there.
Yeah,
Play tank.
yeah. And then these controllers is built-in for that. So
Yeah,
as this is very annoying. Like this isn't very interactive at all, right?
yeah,
I mean, I would get kind of frustrated. Well, what we can do is I'll create some customized controllers
yeah,
for that specific game, and then you don't even have to use any of this. You just have to select your piece and then move everything accordingly
yeah,
based on the track of that of your board
yeah,
games. So
yeah,
same thing for chess too. They'll
yeah,
have some
yeah.
stuff like that.
No, that's all cool stuff. See, that's a completely different way to look at something, having fun with, with blocks and stuff. So, Yeah, I use some of the action parameters and blocks and rotate and I use rotate. I used what's the other one I use? Is it stretch or lengthen? Um,
Hmm.
and then what else? There's another one I use. But there's so many. You can get so creative with blocks, all the different actions and stuff that you can do in there, even with the constraints, so you can get really,
Hmm.
really creative um, with those tools.
Oh
But I use
yeah, and
visibility states all the time. So, um,
well, and the issue with visibility states is you can't have more than one active,
mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So when you're wanting to, and that's the issue I was coming with was I was trying to have too much going on in different visibility states, and I was kind of overly complicating it. So whenever I
Yeah.
simplified it, I was able to have just three visibility states comparatively to having
Mhm.
seven, and they all kind of work a bit more cohesively together.
Yeah.
So um, that's why I kind of go into that initial concept of, again, we just started out with a rectangle and a circle with the little
Mhm.
polyline.
Yeah.
And then we built our dynamic properties off of that and then set our final into there and it held everything um, as it was initially built.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. I've
in
seen in a different manner, I've seen people get like some architects get extremely creative with dynamic blocks for like doors and windows and stuff like that. Not just
hmm
having two different types, but they've done some cool, unique stuff with their doors or even furniture and stuff like that. So, um, but no, that's really cool to be able to do something like that. Just kind of thinking out of the box and say, I'm gonna kind of create something. Then you got your little gun on top.
Yeah, so this is an array function
Yeah,
right here. Array function with a specified column offset. And then this one here gives you that animation of it kind of like coming in and out. So
yeah,
instead of having like a stop motion effect,
yeah,
you can kind of depict where you want it at. So,
yeah.
and whenever I was creating this initially, I literally started out with like my first missile was this. It was literally
But
just a polyline, and then I
yeah,
blocked it as my placeholder,
yeah.
and then that became my base point. And then over time, I just built onto it, and then it
Yep.
updated everything else. So,
Yep.
Ian, did you have any questions for this, sir?
No, no, not really, but that's very cool. Very cool. Um, yeah, hopefully when it gets done, y'all be able to see the other game he's been working on with the chess. That was pretty cool. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
the
that's
the chess game is done. That's been
oh
done for a long time. I'm making Clue right now.
yeah,
Yeah, Clue is the hardest one, I would say. So, it's going to be a bit loaded. It's going to be pretty cool.
yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah. But yeah, really, really good stuff. I mean, that's pretty cool to think of that way. Um, I'm sure some people are going to start having questions like, oh, well, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you build stick figures and have them fight? Can you race cars? Having two cars, like two tanks, they're going to get creative. People start asking questions, which is good. Um, but yeah. So how
Yeah,
long did it take? I guess, doing it everybody saw it for about an hour, but the brainstorming and then the process of elimination, how long do you think it took you to get to that point, a finished product?
um, so this is my version two of it. So
Yeah,
I built this one about 2 years ago,
yeah,
but then I lost the CAD file for it.
yeah,
So then I had to redo it all. Um, and the vision was creating a stop motion type of block
yeah,
effect, right? So I can kind of create this snippet of each visibility state of it tracking different things. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And I wanted a bit more interactive. So my version two was replicating that as what you've seen in that other drawing where I was
yeah,
kind of brainstorming the same things, but I wanted to throw some more features onto there. And it
Hmm.
was kind of becoming like, okay, this is getting a bit of a headache. So I'll probably have to re look at this later. So and then I had three different concepts for it. So,
Hmm.
but I guess in total, it probably took me about 6 hours,
Hmm.
yeah, 6 to 8 hours of just like, because once you have an idea, you try to
Yeah.
make your idea work.
Yeah.
And then once you exhaust your own resources, you have to do something else.
Yeah.
And then you have to figure out that idea and see if that works. And then
Yeah.
you realize these ideas just are not working.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there was a lot of cool things that I learned along the way and seen some limitations that, you know, that AutoCAD has itself,
Hmm.
which is it's pretty cool whenever you start exploring these different things and then you start seeing limitations of AutoCAD
Yeah.
and then start going through the
Yeah.
Autodesk form and you're like, okay, maybe this is an issue someone else faced.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. I guess, have you thought about turning those tanks into like a 3D solid and see what it looks like?
oh no, that would be too complicated. Just yeah, the amount of
Yeah.
no, I don't that yeah, I don't really 3D model like that.
I don't really
So
do 3D modeling in
now,
AutoCAD. I've only done it once. I had to build a custom part, a water part, like to detail from a manufacturing manual for a pressure network part, appurtenance and stuff. So I was learning how to do all these different 3D unions and slicing and stuff like that in AutoCAD. So um, and then getting the uh, water parts to recognize the new 3D part that I created. So so that was kind of fun. That was probably 8 years ago, the first time ever doing 3D solid modeling. So but no, I guess a
hmm
yeah, you'll guess run into I guess limitation of AutoCAD, and that's where I guess you would, if you wanted to have more fun, you go into like 3ds Max and then you have all the available tools. But yeah, um, no, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I didn't ever think about taking anything that in that direction and that that level. So I do pretty simple stuff where I'm just having visibility states and dynamic blocks for more of like doors and what else do I use it for? Parking stuff, signage, um, um, some utility blocks like gate valves and stuff where I'm not doing engineering, it's more schematic. So stuff like that. So some stretching of doors and flipping of doors. Um, but yeah, that's kind of the limit I go to. But
hmm
no, that's pretty cool. That was pretty cool. I enjoyed it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hopefully
There's
that opens up
one,
people, ideas, just think out of the box.
yeah, and this dynamic block that I created was not a complicated one. It was very basic,
Hmm.
right? There was a lot of very basic things in there, but the whole idea was, having complicated line work in different blocks and
Hmm.
more of sustaining
Yep.
working with our dynamic set is the most important part.
Mhm.
Because once you go through a lot of different like CAD standards and block libraries, and if you have one item, one block that houses 40 different, like I've seen 40 different types of visibility states,
Oh my
and
gosh.
they're overloading these, and each
Wow.
visibility state has its own action parameters and
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever. And once you start using them, different ones are not pieced together very well.
Yeah.
So then that's whenever you start noticing, whenever you start using these dynamic blocks and you
Yeah.
start manipulating the parameters,
Hmm.
other parameters are just going crazy.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
But
That's why I never bring in architectural. If it is an architectural block, that dynamic block, I don't bring it into a civil 3D, especially if it's third
mhm,
party from somebody else's engineering firm or architecture firm. I'll typically explode those items and before I bring it into my project. So um, I've had problems one time with somebody had, I guess, some kind of dynamic block. Um, and it was an architectural company. Not that I'm bashing architectural company, but they copied it over to the designer, and then the next, the drawing started crashing and crashing. And so I had to do a problem process elimination to figure out what they did. And I asked them, well, did you bring something in from somewhere else? And I narrowed it down to a block. And then it was a block. It was a corrupted block, and it was a dynamic block, but it had some problems with it, and that's what was causing our drawing to crash, and it kept having bugs in it, run audit, and be like
Hmm.
100 different items that were so I told him like, hey, don't ever bring something over. If you're gonna bring something over, explode it and then copy it over so it's just lines, arcs, and polylines and just MTEX before you just are attaching stuff, random stuff into civil drawings and stuff. So, um, but no, that
Yeah,
was really really cool.
honestly, so looking
It's
at
funny you
that
bring
here
about
is
layer states.
this is
Yeah, go ahead.
this is what is actually pretty common. So if I take all these blocks into here, for example, right? And then they'll explode all of this here
Yeah.
to where once I look inside of my object, I now have all of these different entities.
Hmm.
So whenever I try to individually select, it just does not work. So
Yeah.
it becomes a big
Yeah, you only
mess.
have what, four actions on there? So you got to rotate, you got to angle, you got to distance, and then you got one more, right?
Yep, and then I have an array, two rotation, alignment, and a linear
Okay.
with a move
Yeah.
action.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, the most I ever see is like two or three, on a block. Um, but no, that's really good, really cool. So,
hmm
um, be looking forward to see what you come up with next and stuff. And then I guess once you finish something, can somebody go somewhere and play around with it, or what do you intend to do with those dynamic blocks?
I don't know at the moment. I think
That's-
kind of just building my own personal
Yeah, yeah, there
library.
you go.
And then just seeing. I think what I would like to do is
Hmm.
most people don't know this, but there is a motion feature on your AutoCAD.
Hmm.
So you can essentially create like animations,
Hmm.
like think of a animation of your design file or whatever it
Yeah.
is, and it kind of pans out. So I think in all, I would like to create some sort of stop motion
Hmm.
thing, but do it in AutoCAD without any third-party applications to it.
Couldn't you use the action recorder feature to animate stuff?
No, Action Recorder is good for block properties, not block custom properties, because all of the dynamic abilities isn't set by the block. It's
Mm-hmm.
set only by the custom block the
Hmm.
custom block properties itself. So it doesn't like it can't process that.
Hmm.
It can handle the block rotating and moving and doing different things, but it doesn't recognize you using any of the block
Oh, that's
parameter
well, that's what I
function.
mean. Is like you're animating, you're kind of creating a little action video where I have 50 steps of commands being done in one step with the action recorder, where I'm telling the tank to move, then rotate, then turn around and do different stuff with simple commands, and you just record the actions and then just come back and run the command again and just hit play. And then you watch the tank moving around and rotating. That's kind of what I meant, not the
Well,
tools within the block.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah, that was something to consider too, but one issue with doing that was um I was looking at incorporating some delay
Hmm.
function for it because essentially what the action recorder does is if there's 100 actions in it, you only show it from start A to start Z.
Hmm.
Like once it's here and then it's there.
Yeah.
So if you're putting in these different rotations and moves to blah blah blah
It's
blah,
going to flip immediately. Yeah.
yeah. So then you'd have to create like an action recorder for each step.
Yeah.
So that's where the controller came into play. So
Yeah.
then I can use my controller to kind of move independently in a given scenario.
Yeah.
And it moves very minimally based on my
Yeah.
clicks that I give it,
Yeah.
and then it looks like it's moving. So,
Um, okay, well, we'll stop here. That was a great presentation. That's completely different than we typically see, and that's kind of the point is to think out of the box and figure out how else can I take advantage of some of these tools built into AutoCAD. Um, and so, but maybe next month or two, you can come back and see what you're working on, the next project, or what you've done. Maybe it's a 3.0 version of the dynamic block.
cool.
Um,
Yeah.
but thanks everyone. Thanks, Christian, for coming online and presenting for the user group. And we'll have another presentation in the end of the month. We're going to try to have Sam here with his new tools, 3D modeling tools. You've seen Sam on LinkedIn and other platforms about his Beyond Typicals, but he's got a new product now. So he's going to be coming in at probably somewhere towards the end of the month. And then I have another presenter for March to talk about more construction related items and construction management. So stay tuned and everyone have a great day. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you,
Thanks.
Tony. Thanks, guys. Bye.